Mercury for a Leo ascendant. Now, first, let's think about Mercury and let's think about the houses that Mercury rules over for a Leo ascendant. Mercury rules over the second house and the 11th house. Mercury itself is a planet that deals with trade, exchange, research, transactions, intelligence, communication, just to name a few. And we see here that Mercury is ruling over the second and the 11th house, which are two primary financial houses. When you begin to study yogas, you'll find that combinations of the second and the 11th, the second and the 9th, the 11th and the 5th and the 9th, there are numerous combinations which give what you might consider to be wealth yogas. And really, what does a wealth yoga do? But it gives you knowledge and understanding of the game of wealth and finances and the exchange of energy. When you know how to play that game, when you know when to pour your resources into something, when you know when to take them out of it, you tend to be wealthy. So what we find is that Leo ascendants, ideally, if their Mercury is functioning well, they will really be able to play this game of wealth. This is why kings, nobility, very important people, oftentimes have a considerable amount of money because they know how to play the game. And Mercury is all about playing games. Depends on how Mercury is situated. A person can be very devious in playing the game well. They can be very honorable in playing the game well. But that all relates to how Mercury is influenced. But what it comes down to it is that Mercury is the planet that allows a person to know how to play the game of wealth and resources, second, 11th house things. Leo ascendants having Mercury ruling the 11th house also show that they're usually very good at achieving their personal goals, because the 11th house represents those kind of dreams that we have, those really big things that we want to achieve, those really big things that we want to do. Now, looking back, hopefully, ideally, if the Leo ascendant is using that sun energy, with that idea of an exalted sun in the 9th house, their own personal goals, their own personal drives and ideology will be for the greater good. Many, many people have that. You see people all the time who have a vision of greatness, but it's not just about glorifying themselves, it's about uplifting the people around them. It's about uplifting society or changing society. Now, of course, other things play into how they manifest that. But it is Mercury that gives them the ability to know what things do they have to do, what games do they have to play to succeed. And I'm not a Game of Thrones fan, so hopefully that's not going to lose some people on this channel. I'm aware of the concept, as I have read, I think, the first 2 books, so I know how that goes. But one of the interesting things about that kind of book, even though it's a bad kind of fantasy because it's a little too reflective of what's actually happening in the world, and in my mind, if I want to read something that's fantasy, I don't want to be reminded of the state of the world, because there's enough that I can watch TV for that. But it's playing that political game, the Game of Thrones, the game of royalty. And to achieve your goals, you have to jump through certain hoops. You have to act a certain way. You have to be a certain way in the world that allows you to reach other people. And that's what Mercury does. People make a big deal about Mercury being two-faced and that being a bad thing. It can be, of course, depending on how the rest of the chart is situated. But Mercury being two-faced simply means that he understands everyone's point of view. And this could be, if we can try to internalize that a little bit more. We have people in the US that say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. The Republicans say, every time something goes wrong, it's because the Democrats are trying to screw up our Republican agenda. And every time something goes wrong with the Democrats, they say it's because the Republicans are they're too much of an overbearing tyrant. And it goes back and forth like this. When really what Mercury would do is he would look at both of them and he would say, I see both of your points of view. And maybe the problem isn't one is trying to mess up your agenda, which is going to save the world from catastrophe, and the other isn't that there's just a tyrannical force trying to make everyone rich. Mercury would say, maybe it's the fact that both of you can't work together that's causing this big problem. So Mercury is able to see both. And if you're so entrenched in one side or the other, you're going to think that Mercury is a bad guy because you're not being faithful to one side. Mercury is able to see both. So the wonderful thing about Mercury for a Leo ascendant is, in order to get things done, ideally that king, that nobility, that queen that's represented by the Leo ascendant is able to see the multiple points of view of everyone around them. And ideally, if their Mercury is functioning well, they know how to make a plan. That's Mercury. Mercury is about planning and management. They know how to implement it, also Mercury, so that greater gains accrue, greater gains occur, resources are managed well. And in the end, those larger organizations of the 11th house are benefited, and those dreams and ideals of the Leo ascendant are supported, sustained. So when we think about Mercury ruling over the second for Leo ascendant, this is what it means. Leo ascendants typically are also, can be, very good speakers, relate well to the public. Again, second house speech, 11th house relating to the public. Which is sometimes why Leos get the notion that they make good entertainers. It's true, they can be, but their entertainment capacity comes from that Mercury ability to meet everyone at a common denominator. You know, the best comedians, they're able to make their jokes such that a large group of people can get it and understand it and laugh at it. They're not specific. The best musicians ideally are able to touch and reach a broader number of people, and that Mercury gives this Leo ascendant that capacity to know how to do that. Now, Mercury is exalted in the second house for a Leo ascendant and debilitated in the 8th house. So it's exalted in the second and debilitated in the 8th. Well, what do those two things represent? The second house represents the Leo's own resources, the things that the Leo ascendant is responsible for. The 8th house are the resources of other people. Or remember, the 7th is the other. The first house is you, or the individual. The 7th is the projection of the other. So the 8th, which is the second from the 7th, represents the other's wealth and resources. So when you get a king, a Leo type person, who is more interested in getting the resources of someone else, they're not acting like the highest manifestation of a Leo. When you have a king who just wants to conquer other people, to take their wealth, take their resources, that's not the highest representation of a Leo ascendant. They're not greedy. They want to focus on and grow and manage well their own kingdom and their own resources. The second house, not only does it represent resources, but it represents our immediate family. And so for a king, the immediate family are the people under their care, the people that they are responsible for. So having Mercury exalted in the second tells us that the highest representation, the blueprint of Leo with Mercury, is to be able to look and see what resources are available and what do I need to do to play the game to manage these resources well, to intelligently help them grow, such that my family, my kingdom can continue to flourish. Of course, there can be other reasons why a king wants to invade a certain territory, but it's not because of, ideally, if the Leo ascendant is working in its highest capacity, it's not because of Mercury. So having Mercury debilitated in the 8th house is going to show that when a Leo ascendant, if they're a business person and all they're thinking about is, I need to get more people's money, I need to get more clients so I can get their money, I need to make a better product so I can get their money. If they're thinking about it that way, they're setting themselves up for failure in the long run, and that Leo will eventually burn out and that Mercury will burn itself out. But if they're focusing on the fact that they have a duty, a responsibility, an intelligence to share with the world, and by sharing that intelligence, by doing that duty, resources are accumulated. That is a dharmic, a purposeful, I'll even use the term enlightened approach to how this royalty of the Leo ascendant is meant to function and express itself. So Leos, be very cautious if you find yourself always focused on what can you get from someone else. If
you're able to turn inward and look at that Mercury and think, well, if it's exalted in the second house, it means I need to look immediately in my immediate surroundings and say, how can I set this up such that it works in an ideal fashion? How can I manage the resources that I have here with me such that it works well? A really silly example is when you have someone who, let's say they're a good cook, and a good cook can go into a sparse, poorly stocked kitchen and see ingredients, and using that Mercury, piece together something that would turn into a wonderful meal, even if it was a Spartan set of ingredients. They're seeing exactly what's there. That's like having Mercury well placed in the second house, exalted for Leo ascendant. On the other hand, if you have a person who likes to cook and they have a well-stocked kitchen, they have every gadget known to man, have everything that they need, but the only thing they can think about is what they don't have, and they've got to run around town and waste all this time and energy to get it. That's like having Mercury in the 8th, where there's a lot of waste of resources, when one really needs to be focusing on oneself and what is around them. Mercury also gives a great capacity for Leo ascendants to earn their wealth through their speech, through sharing ideas. And ideally, for nobility or a king, remember we're just using the idea of king as a metaphor here, ideally, the king is well loved and beloved because he is able to communicate maybe why certain things have to happen that are unpopular with the people he's responsible for. So a good Mercury can share bad news in such a way that everyone understands that it was unavoidable. This is the best we could do. Whereas if you have a poorly placed Mercury in the 8th house, the 8th house being a house of sudden breaks and changes, devastation, flaws, then that person has a very hard time sharing information such that other people can understand it in a way and also still maintain respect for the individual sharing the information. So these are some basic things to consider when you think about a Leo ascendant and how Mercury relates to that blueprint of the ideal Leo ascendant. And we can all try to live these ideals, and that helps us with our karma and our karmic burden, even if they're not situated that way in the chart. This is about getting a sense of what are the ideals. And no matter where your planets are placed, if you can tap into expressing these ideals, over time, it starts to actually shift your karma so that if you were to die right now and be reborn again tomorrow, you would reflect, the chart would reflect maybe a greater association with Mercury in the 2nd house, or Mercury in the 11th house, or Mercury well placed for a Leo ascendant.